Good morning, dear friends. Holy Yidden. Welcome and a special welcome to Reb Rafe from the Holy Land. Honor to have you today. Today is the 27th of Adar 1. Today is the 7th of March. It's a Thursday. We're here to study the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Presently, Maseches Pesachim chapter, I'm not going to mess it up, chapter 7 for the first time this year, chapter 7 in Pesachim, Ayin Dalid Amud Aleph 74a, a new parak that we started yesterday, a new Mishnah and a new subject, the subject of the appropriate and the requisite manner of cooking the Karban Pesach. So we noted in the Mishnah that there's a specific type of spit in a specific alignment and arrangement and restrictions. And the bottom line, which we've already uncovered, is the Karban Pesach must be cooked directly with tzli eish, exposure to the heat of roasted by fire, and any other manner of heat, depending on the opinions that we're going to discuss, may not be an acceptable method of cooking, which led us to the discussion of the chosen method of, or the chosen form of spit to roast the Karban Pesach whole. And the Mishnah says that it's pomegranate wood, and we probed not metal because metal conducts heat. And many of the other types of trees have either knots that need to be shaven in order to have a nice, flat, straight spit, or otherwise, for a variety of reasons, may introduce moisture into the inner part of the animal. And the concern is that that moisture, when heated up, we might classify the cooking that occurs at the place where the moisture interacts with the carbon as mivashel, cooking with a liquid, as opposed to cooking directly to heat. And that was really the essence of yesterday's discussion. Today we're going to pick up with a question about the halachic science of the way metal conducts heat. And it's probably not the right phrase, halachic science, but there's certain facts that are the way it is understood by science, and there's certain facts that are the way it is understood in the halacha. And for the purpose of halacha, it is a halachic fact. Let's call it. Let's share the screen and jump right in. Of course, our learning we dedicate for good news for our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land of Israel, and our brave chayalim and chayalot that are putting everything on the line should be safe, and a tefillah for the members of our chabur and their households for good news, healthy news, happy news, and remembering and honoring Yisrael Moshe ben Shmuel Halevi, our dear Dr. Pasternak. Let me share the screen, and we can dive right in. Here we go. Well, actually, we saw this yesterday. I'm going to just zoom down a bit. We had the nice opportunity on Shabbos, though maybe we mentioned this already, to speak to what is the sister of one of the important machers at Sefaria. It's always nice to be able to express our gratitude for this wonderful application that makes our learning possible. And here we go. Okay. Masnisin, the Loiker Rabbi Yehuda, the Mishnah we read that says that you may only use a spit made out of wood, is clearly not in accordance to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Vitanya Rabbi Yehuda, so we read the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says as follows regarding the Karban Pesach: Kishem sheshapud shel eitz eino nisraf, the same way that the wood that's a spit does not get burnt. Rashi, kishatoilam oisai betaner, when you hang or place the spit into the oven. Umechuse batle, Beryl, by the way, your question is going to reemerge in a second. Or Alan, your question, I don't remember now who asked it. Your question is going to emerge in a second. But first, let's see. Rashi explains. You hang the spit in or over the oven. We'll follow Rashi. We'll follow the Gemara saying that it should be oriented up and down, meaning it's face down. And the bulk of the wood is concealed by the animal that's hanging on it. The wood that's inside does not get burnt, does not get singed. Shatle megin alav, because in a sense, the Karban Pesach is protecting it from being burnt. He continues and says that the same thing is that a spit made of metal, ein masha b'toich hatle martiach machmas Okay, I read that. We should really see the Gemara now. Similarly, the spit made of metal does not become all boiling hot on the inside. That was the statement. Amrullah, they responded to him and said, how can you compare wood and metal when you heat up metal? I think today we will say that the heat, we say conducts heat, and so the heat extends across the entire metal. And don't try it at home, but if you would try it at home, you would discover this to be the case. I mean, think about it. You stick a metal spoon into a pot, and you only put the bottom part of the spoon in, and you let it sit there. The entire handle will become boiling hot, and that is not the case if you use a metal spoon. So any person can go into their own kitchen or light a fire and see how it works. So they're asking him, "What do you mean?" There is no comparison between the way wood interacts with heat and metal. Rashi Amrulai, Afal Pisha in Pnimi shall eat nisraf. About Pnimi Shamatachas Martiach. It's true that the wood doesn't burn, the part that's inside, but the metal certainly does get hot. Wood does not conduct heat in the same manner, and therefore it's considered an appropriate manner of cooking. Whereas with the metal, not so. And so, although we don't hear Rabbi Yehuda retort, we don't hear him repeat back. Apparently, this was his shita. This was his belief. How can we make sense of his belief? What would be his reasoning? Any thoughts? Any way we could possibly defend Rabbi Yehuda's opinion? Try to understand it. The claim that metal is not cooking the meat on the inside.
Yeah, the position that the metal conducts heat perfectly. I think this position is justified from the point of view of modern thermodynamics or physics or whatever. That is, the comparison with the metal is a very comparison. Wood doesn't conduct heat nearly as well as metal does. So I don't think there is a defense for the position.
Right, I mean, but again, I don't have an answer. I'm just trying to think this through. Rabbi Yehuda lived in planet Earth, and these facts are easily observable to anyone. And so I find it hard to believe that he is denying the fact that heat is conducted in metal and it's not in wood. So probably we'd have to read it a little more carefully, and maybe his belief is that the amount of heat that's conducted through the spit is inadequate to really substantively cook the animal in a serious way, just as the wood on the inside doesn't get burnt. Again, I'm not sure. I'm just thinking out loud. There has to be. It's hard to imagine and unfair to project that he's making such an irrational decision. I mean, that may be the case.
When you think of it like the way it's not like how I have an oven with heating. They're gonna fire on the bottom. They have the spit going around, and the heat may not actually from the fire may not actually be getting to the ends of the metal, and the rest is buried inside the carbon. So maybe it is true that it doesn't get as much.
Mark, the other question is, now again, I don't think this is true. If you would insulate a spit of, we need a lab, we need to try this out. It's probably I mean, I can tell you right now what I imagine the answer is, but if you would put a strong level of insulation on metal and apply heat on one end, I assume if you projected the other end, it would be just as hot as if there was no insulation, maybe even hotter.
Oh yeah, if you put
because it's conserving. It's conserving.
You're not putting heat on it, you're putting heat on the.
Well, let me ask you this, Mark. If you were to do this differently,
it's open, right? It's all
what
open.
if you were to hang the spit, the edge of the spit over the fire, and then imagine you have two furnaces and you run the two spits on the two sides, and so the bulk of the spit is over empty, cleared, cool area, and you'll hang a carbon on it. So meaning all you have is the heat that's being produced or conducted by the spit.
Right.
How well
Normally you
cooked?
have a fire below, in the middle.
No, I'm saying remove the fire below. There's no fire below.
Right, okay.
My question is, how well cooked do you suppose this carbon is going to be?
Not that good.
Not that well cooked. You'll have a singe.
Maybe a little bit. You know.
So maybe Rabbi Yehuda is not saying it actually doesn't conduct heat. He's just saying, all things considered, it's insufficient to make a difference. And someone made that case yesterday in the Gemara shir. So maybe the person that made that case was actually expressing the viewpoint of Rabbi Yehuda, who says we're not going to take this nominal amount of cooking seriously. Again, I'm just thinking out loud, just trying to think of how we might make sense or appreciate the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda.
You could look at it in another way.
Okay.
If you take an iron bar, all right,
Okay.
forget about the spit and everything else.
Right.
You take an iron bar and put a torch to each end of the bar,
Right.
right? Eventually, the whole bar will have the same amount of heat.
Right.
But if you take a torch, if you do the same thing to this to a piece of wood and put a torch to each end of the wood, each end of the wood would burn, but the inside, the middle part wouldn't be touched.
Right. So what you're saying is,
Trying to say?
what you're saying is that wood and metal is different.
Yeah, the
And that's what
metal.
the rabbis are saying.
Yeah, the
rabbis are saying
heat would conduct itself to both ends of the metal until it reaches the middle, and then everything would be the same. You know, probably similar heat. But in a piece of wood, the two ends of the wood would be burning, and yet the center might still be cold.
Fire doesn't spread in Canada, Alan.
No, I'm just saying I'm not saying put fire to the whole piece of wood.
No,
I'm
no,
saying the end of the piece of wood.
but if you put fire to the end of a piece of wood,
Yeah.
or particularly on both sides, the middle
Yeah.
stays cold. Come on,
The middle will stay cold until it burns, till the fire hits it.
I missed something. What barrier precludes the fire from going into the middle part rather than staying at the end?
I'll give you an example.
Because the metal
Bernie.
conducts
If-
it
if-
much easier.
Bert, I'll give you an example. You light a match, you can hold the match in your fingers. It does not get one end burns, but you can still hold the other end. There's no heat transmitted. But it doesn't make any difference at this point. The point here is that the metal, there's not enough heat conducted to constitute tzli or cooking. That's the point that the rabbis made vis-a-vis Rav Yehuda.
Ellie, don't
Right.
bring the office down trying to do this experiment. That's really. But
What did I say?
I'm sorry, Ellie.
What did I say?
You didn't say anything. But I know you're in the car. Don't burn your car down either. But you always
No,
help
I'm actually.
visual, with experiments. So I want to make sure we don't burn anything down.
I understand.
Alright. So if anyone, I guess going forward, if anyone has any thoughts or ways to understand Rabbi Yehuda, I think that's an interesting exercise. But let's continue. So the Gemara now has another debate. The Mishnah rather has another debate. The debate is the mitzvah. The Torah says that when you roast the carbon pesach, it has to be whole. Now we also know that you need to remove some of the innards to clean them, and certain things are burnt and certain things are discarded. And then the balance of them are eaten. And we already talked yesterday if you'd want to eat it and why you'd want to eat it and who would want to eat it. So let's set that aside for a moment. The question is, are they permitted to be placed into the cavity of the animal and cooked like that? Or are they also hung on the spit and roasted in addition to the carbon paste, to the whole animal? And so we had a machlekes of Rabbi Yehuda, who says they are roasted on the inside, and I believe it was Rabbi Akiva who says that would be a problem because then you're effectively cooking it like bishul. Because what is bishul? You place the food into a pot and you put the pot on the fire. In a certain sense, the cavity of the animal is like a pot. That was what Rabbi Akiva says. So now we'll see some supportive or...
I have a question. Is the carbon pesach supposed to be whole?
Yeah?
So if you take the climb out and cook them separately,
Well, yeah. They only would cut, and we have to discuss this elsewhere. They would cut, I think, I don't know if you call it the knee, they'd cut only like a small part of the leg, and it had to do with the skinning, I believe, of the animal. But the balance of the,
Get enough out also, right?
I'm sorry,
Yeah, the part of the leg you gotta take out, they get enough.
maybe that's it. I don't know. You're right. It is interesting. When we're reading the Mishnah, I was also curious about why we are actually taking off any part of the leg. But anyways, let's see. This is a very short comment, but interesting. Tanya, Rabbi Yishmael Kairehu Toich. Rabbi Tarfin Kairehu Gidi Mikulas. So what we have over here is two different rabbis giving two different descriptions or expressions to this manner of cooking. We'll have to think for a moment if their names are informed by their viewpoint of if it is acceptable or not. But let's take it at face value. Here, Rabbi Shmuel would call it toich. Rabbi Menachem, if you had to guess why it was called toich, what would you say? But if you read already, it's going to ruin it. So tell.
no, I didn't read it yet, but it would be the whatever is within the.
Oh, so Rabbi Menachem, I also would have thought. My mind, as soon as I read, I was thinking like you're saying toich means it's contained, it's within. So type of cooking that there's food within, that makes sense. But Rashi is going to say something that's a whole lot more interesting. Rabbi Yishmael Koreo Toch Toch. The Noisen L'Toichai, like you said. Ukishmatichim umispashlim b'toichai. But when you cook food inside of something, Nishma kol r'tisachasan, you hear the sound of the cooking, and it sounds like toch 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 toch. That's, I think, the Mishnaic way of describing a boiling sound. Kikol hasir, like the sound of a pot. It's actually fun. I'm thinking back to a rabbi that I knew in Israel, and he would have if you would have asked him to mimic the sound of a pot, he probably would have said something like that. That's not really an English way of expressing oneself. I'm sorry.
Back book, when you say when you pour water out of the bottle, it makes back. It's back book.
Right.
Well, in the Far East, they have transportation media that are called tuk-tuk.
Tustus, yeah.
What is it?
Tuk-tuk. The tustus is in Israel. The tuk-tuk is in the Far East.
It's the same idea, but a different name for it.
Like a scooter.
Anyway, so that's an interesting tuch or toich. By the way, if Rabbi Steinsaltz would have changed the nikudot from toich to tuch, it would have been a solid clue to Rashi's impression, which happens to be the way he explains it in the English. But nonetheless, Rabbi Tarfon Kareo Gedi Mikulas. Rabbi Tarfon would call this a Gedi Mikulas, a kid that is Mikulas. Mark, what would your default assumption? The word Mikulas. How would you suppose? What would you suppose Mikulas means? Any thoughts? Any Hebrew speaking thoughts?
Is it like kulam or not? I don't know. Probably.
Oh, it's in the Delaware, Kales.
So kales is a word for praise, but obviously that cannot be the pshat. So
right. So
let's see how Rabbi Steinsaltz translated. Helmeted. It's like a helmet. Why is it like a helmet? Let's see Rabbi Steinsaltz here. The entrails must be roasted where they are suspended from above the spit, somewhat resembling a helmet. What?
Oh, a helmet for the head. It's above the head. So
Is that pshat? Okay, I'll take his word for it.
That's what he's trying to say, anyways. Because if it's above something above
It's
the
like
head,
a helmet that goes above the animal. Interesting, because I would have thought Okay, so now we have to reread the Mishnah. This Bryce is basically saying that the rabbis each had cute names or interesting names that were descriptive of the way they prepared the Karban Pesach. Rabbi Shmuel put on the inside, so he called it the Toich Toich. It's the thing that you cook inside and you hear the sounds. And Rabbi Tarfon says, no, it's a Gedim Mikulas because it is to go on top of the animal. Okay, moving right along. Taner Rabbanon, Eiza Gedim Mikulas, is there a Gedim Mikulas? Also, Lecho B'Leilei Pesach B'Zman Hazeh.
There he said that whole.
Right here, he translates it differently.
Which would be like.
Here he
kula.
translates it as whole. Oh, I'll tell you why we had a problem, because there were Steinsaltz, the Sefaria, which we love, so don't take this as a linked it the next Gemara. Should have been linked in the other Gemara. Mikulas, Lushin Kovea or Kova. It means a hat. Nech7. The Metargamin on Kulso the Nachsha, the sphere lay the title of Mila Barisha, it's hung on top of the head of the animal. Venirin Kekoiva Nechasha. The Choishes al Roish Kibur. It has the appearance of the way a warrior would wear a helmet. Well, this Gedi has this head addition. Okay. So what was Rabbi Yishmael? I'm sorry, what was Rabbi Tarfon calling the goat the Gedi Mikulas? He's talking about the Karban Pesach goat, which, for the purpose of this next conversation, which is, I believe, how Rabbi Steinsaltz translates it, this Gedi Mikulas, a whole roast, cannot be cooked bisman hazeh. Kol shetzaloi kulei kachas. If it is all cooked, it is as one. Nechtach mimeno aver. But if you chopped off some of its limbs, or nishlak mimeno aver, or if you even just boiled part of the animal, ein ze gedi mikulas, it no longer maintains the status as this whole roasted goat, and therefore a kid, and therefore it does not look like you are mimicking or replicating the Karban Pesach. Rashi ke'echad, damila Pesach v'nira ke'oichal kadeshim v'chutzlaretz. We know one thing: Karban Pesach is kadeshim. It's sanctified carbon. It's a carbon, and therefore it may not be eaten outside of Yerushalayim, and therefore you would not be allowed to make this either outside of the zone of the Beis Hamikdash or Bisman Hazeh when there is no Beis Hamikdash. This is the Bryce. Hashta yesh loymar nechtach mimeno aver. Now let's think. Afagav the kamat filei badei. Amras leinish like me. So the Gemara now says something interesting. We said you can cut off a limb, and even though it's roasted, it doesn't get considered a gedi mikulas. Nishlach mivoye. If you boil it, of course, it should not be a problem. Of course, this would be okay. We already said if you cut it off. So just cutting it off and cooking it regularly, it's not a gedi mikulas. You cut it off and you boil it. That's like beyond. Of course, that would be like a super heter. Rashi says the assumption is it was cut off and then cooked. And as soon as you cut off that limb, it should already pater you. So Rav Sheshes explains, no, you have the whole big animal, you're getting it ready to roast, and I guess he dipped the arm into a pot of water. So or one limb. And so what effectively has happened is the animal is not being fully roasted, And therefore you would either be not a gedi mikulas by cutting part off, or by just cooking part of it in an alternative way. One second. All right, let's see. We have a.
By the way, Rabbi,
Yes.
I don't know if you heard me in the beginning. Rafe was going to be only for 30 minutes. He had an appointment. He texted me
Okay. So he's on.
Yeah, but he texted me that hopefully Mr. Hashem will rejoin next week.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rabbi Nachum.
Because tomorrow it's Friday. Tomorrow Friday
It's already.
in Israel 4:30. It's too late.
All right, Rabbi Nachum, we're going to send you the finder's fee, okay? Shkaya.
Rabbi,
Yes.
maybe a silly question,
Never silly.
but we have all these things so that we should remember the Korban Pesach.
Okay.
And then we go about talking about doing things which would have made it not a sacrifice at the time of Pesach. The way to remember, I find it a bit strange.
Well, you want to always make sure that your commemoration does not appear like a replacement. And so that's it. We are commemorating an important event, but we are not replicating or replacing it, particularly when there are halachically fraught issues. So, for example, to make a Korban Pesach, or for the kids to think that you're making a Korban Pesach instead of a Zecher Korban Pesach, would be a grave problem, right? So I suppose that's the simple.
No, we'll end up with more a tradition of how to ruin it and how to do it correctly.
I'm sorry.
We will end up with more knowledge of how to do it wrong than do it right over time.
Why? From our Gemara or from life?
Because you have to cook it, find water, take off the limb, all things that would disqualify.
I mean, first of all, this discussion, by highlighting the things that disqualify it, we automatically understand that they are prerequisites. Our main discussion, I guess what's curious, Rabbi, and I think this may be your point, and it's interesting to consider that we're studying a text that was composed during the diaspora as members of, whether we're the diaspora or Israel, I mean, for the purposes of not having the Korban Pesach, and we're having a living dialogue about how the Korban Pesach is to be brought. Right? And so if we're going to confuse the matter by introducing incorrect cooking methods, you're saying it might confuse people. But I think if people could get this up to this point in the Gemara, they'll be able to understand the distinction between the Korban Pesach, that's the Chiyuv, and the Pesach commemoration. But it's important to be clear. All right, Amar Rabba. Hi, Mula Yasa Sharya. Let's hear our Steindl. The stuffing of raw meat inside of another animal that's being roasted is permitted. And Rabbi Steindl continues, and we'll see Rashi in a moment, even if the meat that was stuffed inside has not been roasted, to remove the meat. So we talked about roasting a Korban Pesach with meat inside of it. The interesting thing is, if you broil meat, you don't need to salt it. The broiling takes out the blood. As a matter of fact, the liver, right? The way you kasher a liver is, anyone knows how to kasher a liver to eat it?
You have to broil it.
You have to broil it. So broiling, grilling, roasting is an appropriate manner to extract blood. The question is, can you stuff the broiled animal with other unsalted meats? How can this be okay? You're going to have blood absorbed into the raw meat. The same way that any blood will be absorbed, it'll be further extracted. Because where is the blood that's going to be absorbed? It's coming from a process of extraction. So any concern that blood will be absorbed will be further extracted. Let's read Rashi. Hamul Yasa. In Holdura Belaz, Kamashana Mamalim, Hatloyim, Vatarnagoylim, Bein Basar Latzamas. I think there's another word for this. Anyone familiar with a turducken? Anyone?
Yeah.
Anyone ever
It's
ate
a
a
hybrid. It's a hybrid.
Talking that chicken.
No, I think what it is, it's a turkey stuffed by a duck, which is stuffed by a chicken, or maybe.
Yeah, one or the other, yeah.
I've never had one personally, but
My son, I didn't have it though. Told me about it.
we're talking about a stuffed turducken.
Ducking.
Sure.
Ducking then.
Ducking. All right, let's look. This is very necessary for our purposes. Again, this is foul, so Rebel, you would be allowed to eat it on anyways, you get the point. There's a turkey with duck and chicken.
I would consider that kilayim.
I'm sorry.
It's not growing.
I
that
would
way.
consider that kilayim.
Yeah, well, this all happens, unfortunately, only after the birds 120 experience. So, yeah. All right. So the question is, let's see, Rashi. We have a stuffed animal. Sharya afilu leibishla sabasar. Even if they didn't cook the meat, shanois l'teichai. Mutar afilu malchai kem lichas li. The ibim lichas kol soyrech likdeira pshita. Even though it has not been properly salted, the roasting extracts the meat, and any blood that will come from one to the other will be extracted as well. Let's look at our Mishnah. Maybe our Mishnah helps support this question. Noisen es krav, but you're allowed to stick the legs and the entrails inside of the animal. Sorry, 1 second. Take a peek. My time, isn't it because we say that any blood that will be absorbed will also be extracted? There's a difference. You know what the difference here is? Maybe here, is unique since there is the place of the shchita which is hollow. And so more heat is able to enter into the innards of this animal than a turduncan. So maybe the turduncan is more sealed. Because it's sealed, maybe you need to salt it first. But when it comes to the Korban Pesach, there's a big hollow open area for a lot of heat to come in. And so maybe there's a better chance that the heat will draw all the blood out. Meaning that this may be a unique scenario, and it does not necessarily indicate that we would always be allowed to not salt the inner meat. And because there's a hollow open area, made of doivi, the blood will flow out. But in a regular case, maybe that would not be okay. Rashi made of doivi lefi shechenitla betaner. When you hang this spit in this animal, this roast in the oven, upi beis shchita lamata, and the area where you shechted it hangs downwards. Hadam yoyse derech halal hatzavar. The blood will gush through the opening in the neck, and I believe maybe the head is even removed. No, they can't remove the head. There's a very, very large opening to allow the blood to drain out. But in a regular stuffed, what's it called? There is no such opening, and therefore it's going to be a problem. All right, let's see someone. Name a Misayele, maybe there's another text, another brisa that will support what Rava said about Keboyle Kachpoltai, that if blood can be absorbed, it'll be further extracted. Let's take a look. Halev, how do you kasher the heart? Kaira, you might say dama, you have to first tear it open and draw out the blood, remove the blood. Like karai, if you didn't tear it open, you could tear it open after it's cooked. And it's kosher. My time, why would it be kosher if you didn't tear it open to begin with to allow the blood out? Surely it's because we believe that if the blood from inside gets absorbed into the meat, it'll also be further extracted out of the animal entirely. So the Gemara says no. There's something unique about a heart. Shani lev the shia. The heart muscle, the heart meat is different than ordinary meat. it's smooth and it doesn't absorb as much blood. But generally, you have to actually extract the blood by a more direct application of salt or fire here. The Shia v'leibola afilu b'gdera nami shari alpagav the lake l'nemer kach polter. So we got to take a little detour into the laws of kashrus and the laws of extracting blood. The Gemara asks, there was a story that Ravin, the elder, the Saba, wrapped a young dove in dough. For Rav, Amar Lei, and Rav told him, Imali tifle, havli veichel, if it's yummy, I'll eat it. I don't think he said the word yummy, but you get the point. Tastes good, I'll eat it. And what we see here is ostensibly meat that was enwrapped. And so probably the blood, when you roasted it, cannot go out because it's going to be absorbed into the bread, into the dough. So we see here that probably whatever blood could be absorbed during the roasting would also be extracted. So the Gemara says this case is unique as well. Hahi, bismida demifir. We're talking about a very crumbly, a crumbly coating that allows the blood to pour forth. Interesting.
It doesn't actually say it wasn't salted though.
I'm sorry?
It does not say that it was not salted.
No, roasting is an alternative to salting, right?
Right, but you can still salt and roast it. Kosher by salting. Everything we have is kosher except for liver. It's already kosher by salting, and even if we broil it, we broil it.
Let's see. Let's see if Zefaria will link us to some halachic references. Nope.
So, Rabbi,
Yes.
so, frozen turkeys, for example, Empire, whatever company, they have the innards and all the other parts stuffed into the bird.
Right.
So the question is, if you don't bother to forget, and then you put it and you roast your turkey, and you take it out, and all of a sudden, oh wow, what's that? And it's in a plastic pouch. The question is, what do you do? Could you eat the turkey? Do you have to? What's the story?
So I'll tell you this. In general, the
once and the Rav said that you can eat it, but don't eat the stuff in the inside. That's why I years ago made that mistake. I told the Rav.
What did the Rav say?
He said, since it was in the pouch and all, you can eat the chicken still, but don't eat don't go all the way to the bone. In other words, figure the stuff that was in the bone could have absorbed something from the liver, but they didn't think it got into the meat.
So I have Mark at the same opinion from Moshe Feinstein when 60 years ago, whenever it was, my sister Aleha Shalom, a new Rebbitzin, for the first time made the bird, and she calls. I usually carved it. She calls me in, and she calls the husband in. She had never done it before herself, and there's the packet there. He called Rav Moshe Feinstein and got him, and he said, "No, don't eat it. You don't know what came out from the pouch, even though you can't. It's no good." So we waited another hour to get hamburgers from the freezer. So that was, but it was Rav Moshe Feinstein who.
Sorry about that. Don't know what happened. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That must have been difficult.
You learn.
Wow.
So for the next 30 years, Thanksgiving was celebrated in Teaneck and not in wherever they happened to be. And they came. Anyway.
What a story.
Yeah.
And that they got Rav Moshe on the phone.
Right.
Good to get Moshe. I just had the Rav of my show. This is I guess it's probably 40 years ago already. But...
No, this was 1966.
No, I was only a kid then.
What a
I think
story!
it was
Wow.
first, probably 83, maybe 84.
All right. Okay. Well, they blew up our.
Historic action.
Share the screen again.
So I don't know. So what is, I guess we have two, we have two different opinions from.
Interesting. So yeah. So hold on, but I do want to clarify. Here we are, Dr. Hammer. How did your sister cook the turkey?
In the oven, in a pan with a thing underneath it, a grill sort of thing underneath it,
Right.
and in the oven.
And inside was all the stuff.
All this stuff in a bag. And the bag wasn't officially opened. He asked all of these, he explained exactly what it was. And he said,
But what did the plastic
You know,
melt?
Was it plastic or was it paper? Because some of them at times they used to use paper.
that was plastic. It was a plastic kind
And it
of.
didn't melt?
No.
Interesting. Well, here it looks like we're talking about you're roasting this over fire, and that is an alternate way of removing the blood instead of salting. And the question here appears to be, if it's stuffed, does all the blood emerge, or are we afraid that some of the blood will start to emerge and be absorbed back into the meat? And so, and actually, here, let's just do this really fast. Shulchan Aruch, din oifai shenim lo basar. If you stuffed a chicken or another kind of meat with meat, oifai segedim shemamalo moisan basar shalai nimlach. They weren't salted. Imlitzli, if it's for the purpose of roasting mutter, afilu piyam l'mayla, even if they're facing upwards, like we saw that I preferred to be facing downwards. Afilu nimlach achitzayin, even if the exterior was salted. Because just as the blood will be absorbed, it'll be extracted. Excuse me. Be like they are also, but it cannot be done for a pot type cooking. Until you salt everything on its own. Okay, so anyway, so there you see this discussion in halacha. Now let's get back to what we're holding. Another story. Rava came to the house of the Reish Galusa, and they did this breaded goose. Amar, he said, if I wouldn't see that the breading is clear like white zuz, or the white coin, I would refuse to eat it. But if Rava would hold that that as the blood is absorbed, it is extracted, my irakizik, who cares what the dough looks like? I feel like nami. Where answers Hasam the Chibrasa the Shar. Here we're talking about here we are talking about white flour, which doesn't make it so easy to extract blood. Rashi kasha v'nepota, it's hard, and it doesn't usually extract the blood. Let's see Rabbi Steindal's here. We're talking about white flour, which is firm and does not allow the blood to pass through. Rava ate it because its color indicated that no blood remained in the breading, but if he couldn't be absolutely certain, he wouldn't eat it. You realize this was a political statement that he doesn't trust the exilarch, who was an important person. What's this? There we go. Also very interesting. Hilchisa, the halachic matter, says the Gemara. Dismida, flour, bein asmik shari, whether the dough is red or remains clear, it's permitted. But if it's the chivrasa, if it's clear dough, izik kizuz chivra shari, if it's very clear and no blood in it, it's kosher. If not, it's aser. The shar kimachim, asik maser loy asmik shari. And for the balance of doughs, if it turns red, it's aser, and if it doesn't turn red, it is mutter. So here we have a very interesting tangent, which is, can we assume that dough that's coating a meat that's roasted, can we assume that it's kosher? Can we assume it's not kosher? So it all depends on the type of dough and the color of the dough. Excuse me. Hi, Mulyasa. We talked about meat stuffing. Manda asur, the opinion that says that it's asur until you roast it all. Afilu pumalatachas, even if the mouth is facing downwards, which is the preferred method. Manda sharia afilu pumalael. The opinion that permits it, even if it's facing upwards. The hilchasa mulyasa sharia afilu pumalael. Nalach lamaisa is that if you have a stuffed goat and you roast it, whether it's face up, whether it's face down, ultimately is kosher because the heat will extract the blood and it remains kosher. All right, now let's talk about more unsalted meat. Umtza, bei umizriki, which are raw meat, testicles, and veins. Pligi baravacha baravina, there's a machloikas between Rav Ach and Ravina. Let's see Rashi. Umtza the asmi chatichas basar. Umtza is red, fresh meat, raw meat. Similarly, the testicle apparently is red. And similarly, certain veins are red. All across the Torah, Rav Ach is machmir Ravina's lenient. We follow Ravina to be mekel. With the exception of 3 cases where Ravina is actually more strict. We follow Rav Acha to be more lenient. And so basically we're about to explore 3 different discussions, 3 different debates, where unlike everywhere else in halacha, Rav Acha is more strict and we don't accept his opinion. So we want to understand other types of red or bloody meat. We have this introduction first, which is that this is one of the rare occasions. Let's see. First debate, and maybe we'll stop here. Hayom saw raw meat, asmik, that's red, presumably because there's blood. Chatche, you cut it, umalche, you can cut it and then salt it. And afilu l'kdera shari, and then you can cook it even in a pot. Meaning once you cut it open and salt it, it's okay. Shpide b'shapuda. If you put it in a spit, shari is kosher. Because meidav doyiv, the blood will be drawn out of it. Achasei agumri, if you're going to place it on coals. Pligiva Rav Ach Ravina, here you have machlekes of Rav Ach Ravina. Chad aser v'chad shari, one says it's aser, one says it's mutter. Man the aser, mitzmas, samis. Why does he say that it's aser? Because the heat will cause the meat to shrivel, and when it shrivels up, it holds the blood inside. Man the shari, the one that permits it, Mishav Shoiv says the heat will draw the blood out. The hilchasa Mishav Shoiv. The halacha is that the assumption is that the heat of the fire will draw out the blood. So I think we're going to pause over here. Totally different topic than we started. We're talking about the subject of cooking and cooking the carbon Pesach and how it should be cooked. And so we've taken a little detour to explore the analogy or a similar case to the way that the carbon Pesach has something stuffed inside of it, according to Rabbi Shmuel. What if you would generally stuff meat with raw meat or a chicken with a duck or whatever? And does it need to be salted or not? And ultimately, we see there's a machlokes, but the Gemara paskins that it doesn't need to be salted because the roasting itself against the fire draws out the blood. The final scenario that we just mentioned is in a case where the meat was sitting, and so the blood seems to have settled. And so, can you still remove that blood through salting? And so the Gemara says, if you salt it, you could remove it. And if you're going to put it on a spit, you could also remove it. What about placing it in the fire? So there's a machlokes, because maybe now that the blood's already there, it's just going to harden the meat and just make it more problematic. But ultimately, the halacha that we paskin is that not only does it not make it worse, it makes it better, because heat ultimately extracts and draws the blood out of the fat. And that, my dear friends, concludes today's
Rabbi,
discussion. Yes.
after you stop recording, Rosalie has a question.